people who aren't here can see them, or if you find it riveting, you could always go back, which is unlikely, but you never know what you might have missed. Anyway, thank you for all of you for tuning in. This has been fun in a completely different way. Of course, I wish you were all here with me and we were walking the land, but that can't be. So we're going to a place, two places really, that are the Mazzur Hill and Hull Pond. And this is a trail that we'll be going on that is not one of our regular trails. It's not marked for regular walkers, but we do, the Nature Conservancy, we do lead walks here on occasion. So it's sort of more of a specialty site. For one thing, it's very difficult to maintain it so that it's walkable a lot, and you'll see that as we go along. So the other thing is, I have heard this referred to as Mazzur Hill. I've also heard it as Sallie's Hill. The land was originally purchased from Sallie Mazzur Delano. She had a second marriage, so nobody really knows what it's called. And then Hull Pond also has had several names. I grew up knowing it as Hull Pond, but other people call it Hutch's Pond or Sunny Pond. And it's kind of indicative of what happens on Block Island. Names of places are known to individuals by when they first became aware of the place. So it's usually generational. I might know something as Mazzur Hill, and the next generation might have learned it as Sallie's Hill. And there are many places on Block Island, Breezy Point, Harris Point. They all are those two places are the same, but different generations on Block Island knew it as different things. So this is akin. So if you hear this as something other than Mazzur Hill or Hull Pond, it's probably not wrong. It's probably just a naming phenomenon on Block Island. So we'll see this view again. So I'm going to move on to our map to kind of get you situated. Last week, down in the corner, you'll see, oops, everybody see the new screen? Yep, good. Down in the corner, you'll see a little blowout or a blow in of the southern part of Block Island. And last week we were in this area. This is Fresh Pond that I'm pointing with the arrow. And we walked that trail from there to Robbins Hollow. So today we're just north of there, roughly in this square. Nobody should take these maps as exact. They're very close, but the scale is so small, it's hard for me to be exactly sure. So, if you're trying to count paces to find Captain Kidd's treasure, do not use this map because it might be off by 20 or so feet. You'll be digging a long time. But relative to this becomes important. Fresh Pond, we learned last week, it was the result of a meltwater channel. In other words, water carving out a long channel coming off of the glacier. And the glacier stopped about here, the southern end of this, which is Beacon Hill, the highest point on Block Island. So you see, we kind of have a line here, which is actually the flow of most of the water that came off of this. Oops. Oh, I forgot how sensitive my my screen is. So water would flow in this direction. So it's sort of interesting. You'll have the high point of Beacon Hill here, then the area we're talking about here, and then Fresh Pond here, and Robbins Hollow here, which is also a meltwater channel. But Hull Pond, which we're looking at here, is a circular pond. It's the result of it's a kettle hole pond. And so another glacial term, but it's the result of a large chunk of ice that fell off the edge of the glacier and then becomes insulated by sand and debris sort of catching on it and building up around it, thus insulating it so that that chunk of ice melts more slowly and more debris builds up around it. And so most of the ponds on Block Island are kettle hole ponds, and they're roughly circular, as is this one. And you can tell a little bit that this is, I'm afraid I'm gonna, quite steep, right? This is a very steep hillside, which is again indicative of those kettle hole ponds, where the pond is sort of has a steep slope because it was once the bowl holding a giant chunk of glacial ice. And then this field here is generally known as Mazzur Hill. For some reason, I put it in as SH for Sallie's Hill. So I was thrown a curve when somebody told me it should be Sallie's Hill. So now I'm just using them both. And this right here, number 7, you'll be seeing that in a little bit later. That is actually a giant boulder. It's called an erratic boulder. There are lots of erratic boulders around the island. They're big boulders, and again, they're left by the glacier. Everything about Block Island is about glacial debris. So these giant boulders came from other places, but that is a really big one, and so that's a key feature in and it's right near the top of this hill. So we have the high point here, then we have the low point of Hull Pond, and then to the south, going this way, would be Fresh Pond. So we're going to start, of course, the airport would be over here. This is Isaac's Corner intersection. This used to be known as Smiling Through. Now it's a personal residence. And we're going to start right here. And you would not notice this trail entry if you were just driving by, unless you knew to look for it. But it's pretty well defined once you get there. And what we're going to do is start up the trail, goes along a stone wall, and then it does a little U-turn here, and then it comes up, and it's going up along this ridge right here. And if you look to the north, you're looking into coastal shrubland, which is a key ecosystem on Block Island. And if you look to the south, you're looking at Mazzur Hill, which is a morainal grassland, which is another key ecosystem on Block Island. And so we're going to go along the ridge here in the shrubland, the coastal shrubland. There's a little loop right here. And then we come back, and I darted over here and took some photos so I can talk about this ecosystem. And then we'll go back down the trail and take a little turn and go to the edge of Hull Pond. So in this little walk, we'll be covering 3 ecosystems, the coastal shrubland, the morainal grassland, and freshwater wetlands. So it's a pretty short walk, and it covers a lot of information and a lot of, it's a good sampler. We'll just think of this as the sampler for Block Island's ecosystems. Okay, so there's our start. Here's our starting point. This is the number 1. Again, the numbers correspond. I do have a number up on the top. It says entry path to Mazzur Hill and Pond. That's number 1. So if you were to go back to the map, you would see where this is. And right behind me, from where I'm taking this photo, is West Side Road. The beginning of West Side Road, Kunamis Road. Sorry, the beginning of Kunamis Road, just past the intersection of Isaac's Corner. So you can see it's fairly well maintained, pretty typical. And then you don't go very far. Actually, on this path, you get to about here, and then it does this U-turn. So you can see I'm standing here, I'm looking back at the road, and then it does this U-turn that goes up, starts going up the hill into the coastal shrubland. So you get a sense of what the terrain is like. So as we go up to that ridge and walk along, again, if you look to the north, you'll see typical shrubs of Block Island. Now this is, you can almost, without looking at a flower, a berry, or a leaf, you can tell that this is shad bush, or shad. We know it, we shorten it to shad. But it has that smooth gray bark, little blotches of lichens, and a kind of a wavy kind of aspect to the trunks. They also usually have multiple trunks in one outgrowth. So this is just like the typical look at at a shad bush, which is one of the three major shrub types that make up the coastal shrubland of the island. You can't really tell from this picture, but I am actually looking downhill. In this picture, we're looking downhill, and there's a little glint over here and over here, which is the pond, but it's a very steep hill, and that's not how you get there. But I was walking along the ridge and on the path where I look to one side and I see the shad, and I look to the other side and there's a stone wall separating the two fields that I'll be talking about. And there, nestled against the stone wall, I guess she figured she'd gone as far as she could, is a painted turtle. And I'm sure she came up to lay eggs, because most of the time they spend their time in the pond. And it's pretty great. When you go on a walk on Block Island, you just never know what you're going to find and what luck you're going to happen into. So there she is. She'd already laid her eggs. She wasn't actively laying eggs when I found her. So I did pick her up and examine her closely. And she's quite a beautiful turtle. It's estimated to be about 20 years old based on its size. The fact that it was wandering, because of its size and the fact that it was wandering from its pond, most definitely is a female. And I could have put in, I get pretty fascinated with these turtles of Block Island, of which this is one of 3 species. So I could have done the rest of the slide presentation with painted turtles, but I spared you that. But these are some unique views of the painted turtle. And as I like to tell people, this is where you can understand how a turtleneck got its name, because you can pull your head in there and pull the skin up and keep your neck pretty warm, or you can start extending it out and see what's going on. Beautiful feet and lots of markings of different colors. I particularly like this. It has this red stripe going down both of its front legs on either side. And you might be able to see that in your view. In my view, the pictures of people are kind of blocking that. So anyway, painted turtle just happened to join me on my walk. And I actually took her for quite a long walk, but I put her back. So when you get to the end of this ridge, there's a loop. And so this is almost to the end, and this is just goes around this little island of vegetation. And there's a little bit over here where it goes off into a path towards the adjoining property, but it's not part of the maintained walkway. The loop is really the end of this path. And as you go along, as I said, you'll see lots and lots of evidence of the coastal shrubland: bayberry, shad, arrowwood, and lots of vines and a good mix of invasive species. I forgot that I should probably slow down. Am I keeping up? Are the pictures advancing? Okay. Okay, thanks. So one of the shrubs that you see in there is arrowwood, and on Block Island, the vegetation changes fast in the summertime. Last week I was showing the flower of arrowwood. This week, most of the arrowwood has dropped its flowers, and at the base of each flower, so this had been a whole umbel, they call it, of little white flowers, but now it has the beginning of its berries, which are green. Eventually they'll turn a very dark blue and be good for birds in the late fall. But we are in summer growth. This is a great view of the leaves for the arrowwood that show how leathery it is, how they call it marginated, how toothed the leaves are, and you get a sense of progression of the summer on Block Island. And right next to it is bayberry. And most of you maybe never knew that bayberry starts off as lime green before it also turns that waxy blue-gray color that we're used to seeing when it comes to bayberry on Block Island. So this is the time of year where you can just see things in different colors. And when I do an art and nature class, I often talk about the fact that you should always date your sketches when you're making notes about what you're seeing and what the vegetation looks like and what the colors are, because the colors change quite a bit. And if you were back in your home field office late in the winter trying to identify this plant that has green berries, if you didn't make a note that it was early July, you might never realize that it was going to be bayberry, because this berry color is going to change quite a bit. And in the case of bayberry, when you're noticing them around the island, not all of them have berries, and that's because this is a plant that is dioecious. It has male and female plants. So the berried plants are the females, and the ones that don't have berries are the males. So that's the shrubland. As we go through the shrubland, on this particular day that I was going, owls I could hear catbirds, but I could hear a lot of these. These are rufous-sided towhee, also known as eastern towhee. Obviously, these pictures were not taken on my walk, but these birds were in evidence along the walk throughout the whole time. This is their ideal habitat, the shrubland, for nesting and for feeding, because they feed on the ground, and they have very strong legs and toes that they scratch and kick up bugs and insects and seeds that have fallen to the ground. They have that cone-shaped bill, which is perfect for cracking open seeds. This is one of our nesting species on Block Island. And basically everywhere that the male is black, the female is that beautiful, rich brown color. And I tend to go with the more descriptive bird names. The rufous-sided, this color on both birds along its side is known as rufous. So sort of a browny, reddish, rusty color. So rufous-sided towhee. Its call is drink your tea, or towhee, towhee. And if you look at an old bird book, pre-1950, you'll see that this bird was actually called a chewink. And chewink is sort of sounds the same as towhee, chewink, towhee, chewink. So those names stick to how they sound. Anyway, I could go on about that for a little too long, so we'll move on. Also, plenty of this around. This is a native species, poison ivy. And if you didn't know, poison ivy also has a berry, beautiful, nice white, pearly white, greeny white berry. Do not touch it. Leaves of green, leaves of 3, leave it be. A lot of poison ivy around the island will have these little red nubules on them. That is a rust. That is a rust is in the fungus family. So some places you'll see lots of it. This one not so much. But poison ivy, the bane of many of our existence, but also a true native plant or vine on Block Island. Although on Block Island it's not just a vine, it seems to grow as a tree in some places. Other thing that you'll see along that walkway, especially where the walk diverges off of the loop into a path that's it's kind of a rogue path that's going to the property owner next door. But this is another one of our warm season grasses, which I am starting to learn. The cold season grasses are things like Timothy and Kentucky bluegrass, grass that grows sort of evenly through the field and is seeds ripen early in the season, and it's used for cutting hay. It's introduced from Europe for agricultural purposes. But the native grasses of Block Island are known as, or New England and the Americas, is what they call warm season grasses. In other words, they grow a little more slowly, and they tend to develop their seeds in the warmer part of the season. And they're clumping grasses. They grow in clumps rather than sort of like an even distribution through the field. There are actually quite a number of these, and I believe this is called sheep fescue, but I didn't have enough faith in my identification to call it that, because the grasses are quite hard, and that's an area. And so my my confidence in going to species is not perfect. But it's interesting to note these wonderful warm season grasses and how they contribute both structure and seeds at the right time of year for birds, which is, of course, what I care about. So we've just done what you should not do if you're taking this walk. I went over the stone wall into the other field, this field, the Mazzur Hill, and went over to the erratic boulder that I pointed out. This field is, a lot of it is got herbaceous growth. In other words, a lot of what you're seeing, the green there, is either bayberry or it is goldenrod. And then this sort of reddish tinge in here, that's some of those warm season grasses. The soil type here, this is what is really called a morainal grassland. The soil is very poor in nutrients and organic material. It's very sandy. Only the things that can live in a very sandy, very dry, nutrient poor environment can live here. But everyone's, and I saw throughout the walk in the field, oops, wrong way, oops. There we go. Throughout the field, there are evidence of lots of very large glacial erratics. Most of them are just peeking out of the ground, but it might be 4 or 5 feet of a rock just peeking out of the ground. This particular rock is well out of the ground. And I don't know why I did not take a photo of the whole rock, but I took, maybe because it's so big. But so here's the rock. Here, this inset is a surface of the rock. You can see it's got the name Sallie in there. It's recognizing the donor. It also has the second name is an abbreviation of Delano, not Mazzur, so it represents that particular time in her life. But so this is also another version of that same rock. It's beautiful. If you look at the structure of the rock, first of all, it's mostly granite, although there is some quartz, which is very typical of the erratic boulders that you find on Black Island, whether in the field or on the stone wall or at the shoreline. Lots of granites and quartzes. But because of the way those are formed, they have wonderful patterns. Here you can see this curving pattern. The pinker part is some of the quartz, sandier part, some of the granite, and wonderful lichens. There's at least 3 types of lichens visible on this rock. There's this green, there's this black, and some places it's a little bit more gray. And the black is not a dead lichen, it's its own species. Again, another area. If you start looking at the natural history of Black Island, there's so many areas to become expert at that you have to start slowly. And so, like the warm season grasses, I'm working up to the lichens. For now, it's enough to recognize that they are different species. They grow on different substrates, some on wood, some on stones, some on live trees, some on dead trees. But they are critical to a morainal grassland because lichens are the pioneer species. They're the first thing that lands in a new area and starts growing on a rock and slowly over eons breaks it down into soil eventually. Lichen is it's a symbiotic organism. It's part fungus and part green algae or green algae of some sort. And the fungus part of it breaks down the nutrients and the substrate, and the algae part of it produces the energy from the sun to keep it alive. So lichens, they grow in many forms, but they're fascinating. This is another version of that same field. This is a good view of what a morainal grassland looks like. very sparsely vegetated. There's no thick grasses where there's a little soil. Maybe the bayberry is coming in where you see that right here. But mostly it's very sparse and spare land. I'm going to try something. I'm going to try to explode the view on this. Let's see if I can do that. Did that work for you guys? Yep. Okay, good. So you can see as you get closer, there's lots of little things in there. There's lots of little grasses. Again, these are the warm season, a different species of warm season grass. There's some trailing vines. So blackberries or dewberries will be in here. Those are the ones on the ground. And these little tufts, they look like little dandelions, excuse me. But they are the seed heads of a mouse-eared hawkweed, which loves it seems to thrive in this sandy, harsh soil. And its leaves grow as a mat on the surface, so you can sort of get that sense there. I'm going to try to go to the next, I guess I have to zoom out. Go to the next slide. And here we go, some close-up of what I was just talking about. I think I better have a little sip of coffee. So on the on the left is a dewberry. So a dewberry and a blackberry are in the same group of fruit and plants. They're actually in the rose family. Blackberries generally are the blackberries that we all know of that grow in a sort of erect, arching, big, high, shrub that you don't have to bend over to pick. But the dewberries, also a blackberry, but known generally in a general way as the dewberries, are the much smaller blackberries, and they grow on trailing vines that are at the ground level. They don't reach up, and they aren't what they call erect plants. They're more trailing and viney plants. So when people talk about dewberries or blackberries, they're really all blackberries, and the dewberry is just a subsection describing the type, the substrate, and how it grows. Of course, there are all many, many, many different species of blackberries / dewberries on the island. And if you've spent any time picking blackberries, you'll know that sometimes they're big and luscious and juicy, and sometimes they're small and luscious and juicy. The dewberries are really quite delicious, but it takes a lot more to get a handful than it does with the big blackberries that you're used to picking from the upper part of the roadside. But so that's just a little talk about dewberries. And here's a close-up of the mouse-eared hawkweed. And again, that beautiful, you can see why it's called mouse-eared hawkweed. Those little leaves at the base of the plant look like, and they're underneath, they're covered in sort of white downy hairs, like a little mouse ear. And so that's the mouse-eared hawkweed. You can see that in many places on Block Island. And hawkweeds, again, like the dandelions, are a group of flowers, and they are known by, here it is in bloom somewhere else. Those mouse-ear hawkweed that I showed just a moment ago were at the up at Mazzur Hill in the Moreno grassland. This one was along the side of the road, again, where the substrate, the soil is very poor in nutrients, but this one's still in bloom. But this is actually a tiny plant, and you can see again the leaves. The leaves, basal leaves, all the leaves are at the ground level, at the base, so they're called basal leaves, and the edges are smooth. They call that entire. So there's no, it doesn't go in and out. It's just one smooth edge. And so hawkweeds have smooth edged basal flowers, as opposed to dandelions, which look very similar, and they're very closely related. They also have basal leaves, but their basal leaves are what they call toothed or marginated, and they have some amount of scalloping along the edges of the leaves. So if you're ever wondering if it's a hawkweed or a dandelion, you really have to examine the basal leaves to determine whether or not they're entire, as these are, the hawkweeds, or more scalloped, like the dandelions. And of course, the dandelions have many varieties, many species as well. Some are long, thin leaves that are toothed and scalloped. Some are broad leaves that are toothed and scalloped. But generally, the dandelion leaves and the hawkweed leaves are basal and at the base of the plant. So now we've gone through the shrublands, the coastal shrubland, and we've gone through the Moreno grassland, and now we've gone back down our path, and instead of heading to the road, we headed to the north, along the stone wall, and this path ends just about where I'm standing. If I wanted to, I could have gone to the edge of the water, but there's quite a bit of blackberry briar in there, and I didn't really need to do that. But here again, we have a completely different ecosystem. One of the things that jumps out at me that I didn't notice until I looked at this morning is this flower, this leaf right here. This is wild grape, and there's a lot of wild grapes, which is a vine crawling all over the shrublands in this particular area. A lot of what you're seeing here is there's some arrowwood up here and a lot of blackberry brambles, and down here emergent pond vegetation. I wasn't brave enough to go all the way to the water's edge on this point. This is the only public access point to this pond. On the other side of the pond, over here, on the other side, there's a road that goes in right near the edge of it, but that is actually private property. Now, those of us who grew up on Black Island, we all learned the name of this pond is Hull Pond, and it's a great ice skating pond because, as you remember, if you remember from the topographic view, it's rather small and it's at the bottom of a deep depression. So it's protected on almost all sides from the wind. So, and it's relatively small, so it freezes quickly, but more importantly, smoothly. Because when you get cold weather on Black Island, it's often accompanied with a good stiff wind, which does not make for very good ice skating ice. But Hull Pond, again, many different names. And along the edge, as I say, completely different ecosystem type, lots of plants near the edge. And we'll start looking at some of those. The first one that I found is actually near the edge of the pond, but it was not at the edge of the pond. And the sand around it was very thin and meager, just like the Moreno grassland that it actually is around it. And this plant, which is called lesser trefoil, only grows in, quote, waste places where it's very well drained and no water, even though it was about 5 feet from the edge of the pond. It grows as a vine. It's very low to the ground. It's a mat. Almost everything I learned about it when I looked it up is that it's considered a weed and a pain in the neck and hard to get rid of. But boy, it is beautiful. And it's tiny. If you look at each one of those yellow flower heads, is an individual flower head. Is irregular in shape. You may recognize that shape generally as a pea or a bean. It is in the legume family of peas and beans. And this is the quintessential clover. This is where the clover leaf design comes from this plant. And if you're lucky, you'll find a 4-leaf clover. And although you can find, as a typical pattern for a clover leaf, these 3 leaves right here, and you see it throughout. It's also known as suckling trefoil and lesser hop trefoil, but that refers to its pea background. It does fix nitrogen, as do all the peas and beans. So they are, even though they can grow in sandy, very nutrient poor soil, they're like the lichens are helping prepare the soil for its next evolution. It fixes nitrogen in the soil, which makes it more nutritious over time. So all the peas and clovers and beans, they're good for the soil. And so that's the lesser trefoil, close to the pond, but not really a pond plant. And then there is burr reed. This is the lesser trefoil is a European introduced species. This burr reed it's called American burr reed. This is a native species. This is what's called an emergent plant. It likes its feet wet. It grows right at the edges of the pond. It's got a lot of emergent flowers plants have really interesting looking flowers. Think orchids and the reeds in general, and the sedges have pretty interesting flowers. Those little balancing balls, for lack of a better description, are the flowers of the American burr reed. And this was growing right in the water, but right at the edge. It needs to be close to shore, and thus the term emergent. And then out in the water, growing actually in the pond along the edge, is a water lily, beautiful plant in the water of Block Island. This grows around the edges. This plant stem goes all the way to the bottom of the pond. So this does not, if you look at a pond and you see it covered with either water lily or pond lily, it means that it's no more than 4 feet deep, because it cannot grow in deeper water, because it just can't support its structure that much deeper. So when you look at a pond, as is the case with Hull Pond, you'll see it's ringed around 3/4 of its edge with water lily, but in the center there is no water lily, and that would indicate that it's too deep for the water lily. Over time, most ponds will evolve and get shallower and shallower. They'll fill in, and they'll evolve into a swamp or a marsh, a fen, a bog, and that's just the natural evolution of things. When I was there, it was a very quiet morning. I will say, well, I was not on public land, is what I'll say. But it was a wonderful spot to be. And I was just watching, and every once in a while I would hear bloop, bloop. And I never seem to be looking at the right place at the right time to see the frog jumping into or out of the water. But it was also humming with dragonflies and damselflies. And over here landed on the lily pad is a bluet, which is a tiny, not tiny, it's about probably 1.5 inches long. It is a damselfly. In other words, its wings, when at rest, as it is in this picture, are parallel with its body. A dragonfly's wings at rest are perpendicular to its body, out to its side. But bluets are in good evidence right now on Block Island at any moist, wet area. And it's amazing how they can hover at a plant looking for other insects. These are actually predators. This is a major predator species. It likes to eat other insects. So no sweet nectar catching for these guys. These are rough and tumble predators. And that's pretty much it for the plants that I've pointed out. This pond I've been to many times over the years, and it does have some other wonderful native wildflowers that they're called wetland obligate. In other words, they need to grow at the edge of the water, and but they're not yet in bloom this season. So they will be in a couple of weeks. But that's why I always say, you could take the same walk. It's not really the same walk. You could take the same trail, every other week and have a different walk, because different things are blooming or past blooming or going to seed, or, raising young birds or adult birds or migrating birds. So every trail offers many walks. Around the island right now, peaking is just starting to grow. Actually, not peaking, is on the left. Queen Anne's lace, just starting. And this is a great view because you have the full flower head here and you have one in bud here. And a little bit later in the season, after they pass bud, they also have beautiful form. So, and black-eyed Susan is a great native plant, which if you don't have open fields that are left unmowed in the early season, you won't have black-eyed Susan. And they have definitely declined around the island because the habitat has changed and people really seem to want their lawns short instead of high with wonderful native plants growing in them. But black-eyed Susan is peaking right now. And this was, both of these were taken up by Heinz Field, which is a recreation area on the island, not very, very close to where we are. You could walk from Heinz Field to Hull Pond to Mazzur Hill to Fresh Pond in just a few minutes in either direction, sort of the compass points of Isaac's Corner. But that field that's not mowed next to the athletic field right now is filled with black-eyed Susans, and it's one of the best fields for black-eyed Susan I've seen in a long time. I don't know if the field is especially good or the season, but they're pretty beautiful right now. And it's great. I'm getting people who like to call and let me know things they've found. John Formica, last week, we saw a Polyphemus moth. He had gotten that to me. And yesterday on my email was a picture of this from him. Look what he found in his one of his planters. And what is it? And I believe it's Carolina wren nest and egg. The Carolina wrens make kind of a messy, reedy nest, and they like to find little nooks and crannies like, pots, or I've seen them. They love to go in your unused barbecue grill through the little hole in the side, or also under the lid of the propane tank, in an old hat, anywhere where they can just find somewhere and then start building this sort of messy, reedy nest. So I'm pretty sure that this is Carolina wren. The eggs are, there's a lot of variety, but they're not quite in focus, unfortunately, but they definitely are the right color and modeling for Carolina wren. John thought maybe white-throated sparrow, so I said keep an eye out and see if you can see the bird. I'm sure he'll report back. It would be interesting if it was a white-throated sparrow because they don't nest on Black Island, but they don't nest that much farther north. And this is a winter, the white-throated sparrow is a winter bird on Black Island. So one could have lingered. I think unlikely, but that's part of the fun of nature, is keeping your eyes open and see what you observe and kind of put the clues together. And I've put the clues together and come up with Carolina wren, but anything is possible. And so it'll be fun to follow this little question to the end. And maybe next week I'll be able to report on that. And with that, thank you. And any questions? And you can unmute people, I guess.
I have a question. This is Josie. Can you hear me?
Yep.
We see yellow water lilies. How different are they? What kind are they?
Those are called pond lilies, and they're in the same family, but the flower type is completely different. It's the flower type stays as a rounded ball. It doesn't open up the way the water lily does. And the water lily, if you've been observing them over time, you'll notice that you can't get a picture of them in the afternoon because they open up in the morning sun and then they close up for the afternoon and take their rest. Whereas the pond lily is always sort of in that round form. And I've always wanted, and have not, weighed out to get one so I could examine a pond lily more closely. Someday I will, if I'll have the boots on at the right time, or I'll say, forget it, I'll just muck out and look at one. But so far this is it's the water lily that keeps me captivated. There's an old tradition on Block Island in the heyday of the hotels on the island. The young kids could make a few, not a few dollars, but a few cents, pocket change, as they would say, by collecting water lilies and selling them to the hotels, who would then float them in a bowl as centerpieces in the restaurants. So, most of the hotels had their own dining rooms, the Spring House, the Narragansett, the Ocean View, all of those grand hotels also had grand dining rooms, and the centerpieces would have water lilies floating in them. And I just love that image. And I will admit that there's a water lily on my table right now.
Oh, thank you. That's good.
You gotta get something for all this work.
Yes.
Hi, Kim.
Yes.
It's Pat Saylor. We tuned in late, but so maybe you
That's
already
cool.
covered this. But we have a question about they look like amber flies up at Hodge property right now. They're all on there. They look like amber dragonflies, and they're all over the grasses up there. Do you know what they are?
I don't know, but I'll go look. Now you say they're amber colored, and do they look like flies or do they look like dragonflies?
They look like dragonflies. And so I Googled it and found amberfly, which looks right, except these seem to have little bands on their wings. So we're just not sure.
Well, I'll go take a look and get a picture. I'm guessing those are in the group of saddleback dragonflies, which tend to have, no, you don't think so?
Yeah, maybe,
Blotches,
maybe.
Yeah, blotches on their wings, but there's an expert dragonfly person on Block Island, so I'll get a photo and I'll get confirmation, and it'll get woven into next week's presentation.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Kim, what are you going to cover next week?
That's a good question. I was going to look that up before I got here, but I forgot to.
I'll look. Hold on. I'll find the schedule.
Find the schedule.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. I have the schedule worked out for the, I'm hoping it's Payne Farm.
It's Fresh Swamp Trail from
Yeah.
Payne Road.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be fun.
Okay.
That'll be a good one because there's some nice meadow flowers in there that should be peaking right now. So
I really like that you presented this because this is one trail I didn't know about. So next time I come, I'm going to have to go on this one. This will be fun.
that'd be great.
I have a question about the Mazzur property.
Mm-hmm.
There was always a place not far from there where on the right side of the road where there was a little cemetery.
Uh-huh.
And with the story I heard is that there was a dog buried there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sallie
Sallie
Mazzur's. Yep. Sallie Mazzur's dog, Dinkle Mazzur, and it's a little enclosed, stone wall enclosed cemetery. She actually owned a lot of that land. She lived in Smiling Through, the building that is known as Smiling Through, and a lot of that land on that side of the road, as well as this field, almost all the way to Robbins Hollow, but that land where the Dinkle Mazzur cemetery is, that was her dog. And when she sold and moved away from Block Island, she actually had the dog exhumed.
I thought I heard that.
Wow.
Hey, as another great Islander, Rob Lewis, used to say, dogs are good people, and you don't just leave your good people behind.
Interesting. Well, Kim, it's great to see you. I need to run.
Okay, enjoy.
Enjoy.
Thanks.
Have a good summer.
Thanks for joining.
See you again.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Good.
Kim?
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much, Kim. And I'll send you a picture of my wildflowers that have so many black-eyed Susans this week.
Oh, good. Yeah. Now, who's speaking?
This is Mary on Corn Neck.
Oh, Mary Lutz. Mary.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
This is
Great.
great. Thank you so much.
Good. Good. Thanks for joining. Thank you. And
Thanks
who?
very much.
You're welcome. Who's Cynthia that I'm sort of seeing here?
This is Cynthia Bowdy.
Oh, yeah, that's
Oh.
Cindy Bowdy.
Oh, Cindy. Hi.
Oh, this was wonderful. This was wonderful. Now, I mean, I can just walk up the street and go up that path. I've always wanted to go in there. I thought it was private property.
Well, if stay on the path, don't jump the wall because we only
Oh,
mow.
I'm not going to jump any walls.
We only mow the Sallie's Hill once a year for maintaining the native grassland there. But so right now it's pretty briery and it's got a good amount of those dewberries to trip on and poison ivy to get into the
Oh, boy.
berry injuries. So I have one itchy foot. So.
Okay, thank you. This was great.
Thanks for joining. And our other ones, if not now, will be on our website at Nature Block Island. So each week we're taking a different walk and, maybe you'll take a different walk.
Great.
Yeah, I
Thank
just
you.
put the website in the chat if anyone was curious. I know somebody had asked about where they could find the recording. So the website's listed there if you want to go there and copy and paste it or whatever.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining, Cindy. Oh, Suzanne Wagner too. And I just switched screens so I can now see names. Anybody else have questions?
Okay, well, I guess we'll see you next week, Kim,
Yep.
at Fresh Swamp Preserve.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Thanks, Kim. Talk to you later.
Alrighty.
Talk to you later,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye.
All right, Kim, so I'll sign off here and
Sure.
there we go.